Warning, this episode contains strong language or mature themes. Parental discretion is advised.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Alright.
Cool.
Welcome to This Podcast Is Uncalled For.
What's uncalled for about it?
Well, you can't tell anybody this.
Oh my god, what are you doing? I didn't see the big deal about the human body.
I worship Cthulhu just for the free beer.
Yeah, and don't go to Sam's Club either.
But you didn't even give him a chance for a wild card spot.
What are we doing at Tijuana?
He's like, what did you just say?
Well, the name of this podcast is Stuff Uncalled For?
This podcast is uncalled.
Podcast, alright.
Yeah, that was the most ridiculous ending to that game that I've ever seen.
Oh my gosh, I gotta hurry up. Oh my gosh, I gotta hurry up. Oh my gosh, I gotta hurry up.
We're looking at each other in the eye. We're not going to say anything derogatory to the other person. And, of course, neither of us is drunk.
So I don't hear Pope Francis saying that he's a prophet, seer, and revelator.
What planet are these people on?
And look, thank you, Black Phone.
This is a disgrace.
How'd that happen?
And it's got Chick-fil-A. Hey, we're meeting somewhere.
And now, your host for this podcast, Mike Chernefsky.
Fuji!
Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the end of season 3, which happens to coincide with our 5,000th unique download. If you're wondering what happened to the Zoom call that this was supposed to be, well, the Zoom call happened, but no one else participated. So we definitely need to work on that with the audience participation side of things, and we will work on that before season 4 starts. And as soon as I'm done with this recording, we're going to start work on season 4. And yes, there will be a season 4. And a few notes on season 4 before I go over our stats. Hopefully we'll be able to resume doing interviews, be it by Zoom or over the phone using Blog Talk Radio or in person. I'd like to start back up with the interviews, and we kind of have to, because we will be in the KC Fringe Festival again for 2021, and my understanding is much like last year, the 2021 Fringe Festival will be an online affair. So we'll do those over Zoom, just like we did for the Fringe shows we did for the start of season 3. So I've got some numbers now. So at the time I'm recording this, we're at 5,853 unique downloads. The most downloaded piece of media for the entire podcast is actually not an episode of the podcasts, but it is a song I wrote back in college called Laura that has garnered 404 unique downloads. So I want to thank you all for listening to that. I keep it on there as a bonus because I want to get some music out there as well, and I might, in between seasons, put some more of my songs on the feed. So keep an eye out on that. But the most downloaded episode of the podcast continues to be Ghost Stories. Number 2, Stories Untold Part 2. Number 3, Stories Untold Part 1. So both our season finales so far are among the most downloaded episodes of the podcast. And now you might be asking yourself, well, you're ending season 3, but you're not telling any stories. Well, that's because I'm blanking on stories that I think would be appropriate for the podcast. So, the next most downloaded episode of the podcast is Thoughts on Being a Trekkie. So, all right, cool. So we got a lot of Trekkies listening. So I like that. Thank you. Now we come to the most downloaded interview episode of the podcast. That continues to be Pat Lamb. And in all fairness, it was the first episode of the podcast. So, then next after Pat's is Adam Sadiq. Talking about his game and one thing I would like to do for the upcoming season is get a playthrough of his game. That's a wrap. Chris Lyman would be next at 177. Then our thoughts on being multilingual. Then George Dean would be next. So it's good to see my Tales actors performing quite well in terms of downloads for this podcast. Next up would be the 1,000 unique download live stream. Then we have top 10 board games, and then we have the best performing of the Fringe episodes. That's Brian Boy's episode. He's at 128. We're going to do some math here in a little bit, because this episode in particular needs a little of help, because if you've listened to the episode, you know how it starts with Brian saying, as long as I get more downloads and listens than Trevor and Pat combined, I'm good to go. Well, we're going to do the math on that, Brian. We've already established 181 for Pat, and we'll get to Trevor's numbers in a second. Let's continue with these numbers, shall we? After Brian that's thoughts on being ex-Mormon. That's done pretty well. And then Lucas Stone King and Daniel Raines, the first time they were on the podcast, so before they did Fringe. And rounding up, and all the episodes have 100 downloads as of this recording, is the Christmas announcements bonus that I had to put out to advertise this very episode. And they're not quite at 100 yet, but I'll give you the ones that are over 90, because they'll likely be at 100 by the time this episode comes out. Why I'm now a Cardinals fan. Top 10 movies, which includes my take on the Aristocrat joke. The Smash Up playthrough. And if you're wondering, yes, Brianne and I still do the playtesting, but during these pandemic times, we've been relegated to having to do it online. And no, I'm not going to tell you what we've been playtesting. Although I can say that one of the things we have playtested, the Marvel set, should be out by the time this episode comes out. So, and then San 92 is our episode with Conrado, which I still maintain is the best episode of the bunch. That's my opinion, of course. Also, doing fairly well, the Fringe Festival Volunteers episode that I did, and Tour of KC. And then just on the cusp of 90 are Jared Feldman, the podcasting editing seminar, Adam McKeith, the first time he was on the podcast, and Matt Sewell. So give those episodes plenty of love. Now, let's do some math for Brian's episode. So, Pat, we established 181 unique downloads. Trevor Martin at 59 downloads, plus 1. Brian needs to be at 241 downloads, which would put him ahead of the Tricky episode. And he's currently at 128, so to do the math, Brian Boy's episode needs 113 more downloads. So, get at it, folks. Help my friend Mr. Brian Boy make his goal. Now, who's listening to our podcasts? And thank you, Libsyn, for the really cool maps that you provide me with the statistics. So, clearly, the biggest audience, our home country, the United States of America. And I am recording this, thankfully, on the last day that Donald Trump will be President of the United States. Good fucking riddance. And tomorrow, starting life with a new president, Joe Biden, who, full disclosure, a few years ago, I did a video job in St. Louis for the Veterans of Foreign Wars, their annual convention. And I guess I do have a story left. Because Biden was speaking at this thing, I had to do Secret Service background checks and everything. And on the day that he was speaking, I was literally the first person up that day. And walk across the street from our hotel to the convention center. We were, just right across the street. And I get to the entrance, and Secret Service is there. They already have metal detectors and everything. So those guys do not mess around, but they were also really, really cool guys. And anyone with the United States Secret Service who happens to be listening to this, you guys did a good job. Keep up the good work. Anyways, back to stats. So United States, we have 3,580 downloads from the good old US of A. Number 2, India. 1,828 unique downloads. So to our Indian listeners, thank you, or they say it was probably saying Hindi, and I could be butchering this. Bahut Chakriya. Then things get a little interesting. So after India is France at a mere 86. Merci. Then Ireland 54. The UK 52. And I can tell you, just by looking at those maps, a lot of those 52 came from the West Midlands Villa territory, so up the Villa. 39 from Germany, 35 from Bangladesh, 33 from Pakistan, 23 from our neighbors up north, Canada. And a lot of those came from Ontario. 21 from Australia, 12 from Belgium, and 10 from Nepal. So we clearly have an audience, and I'm grateful for that. Now, within the United States, all but 4 states have downloaded our podcast. But in terms of the cities we're performing best in, well, number 1 should be no surprise, Kansas City, where this podcast is based. Number 2, Columbus, Ohio. Number 3, the San Francisco Bay Area. Number 4, Washington, D.C. Number 5, New York City. Well, wow, New York, just shooting on right up there. So I do appreciate your patronage. So, then we have Chicago, Denver, Dallas-Fort Worth, L.A., Palm Springs. And I'm going to have to change this because I want to acknowledge every place that's given us at least 10 downloads. Minimum 10. So after Palm Springs, it's Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Evansville. Evansville, Indiana, folks. That's still pretty cool. Atlanta, Houston, Yakima, Pasco, Richland, Kennewick. I know it's in Washington somewhere, but I'm not sure where in Washington. Phoenix. Phoenix. Seattle, Tacoma, and the aforementioned St. Louis. Come on, St. Louis. Gotta do better than that. Gotta do better than 13. Minneapolis, Salt Lake City, and Nashville. Got 3 cities around the cusp. Austin, Detroit's, Raleigh, Durham. So get at it. One of my more long-term goals, just a couple of years down the road, I'd like to do a tour of the U.S. and the better the numbers are, the more likely I'll be make a stop. So let's go, get at it. Now, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot else I can really talk about. I don't want to talk about current events, as, at least not to end the season. But I promise you there will be at least one discussion or thoughts sometime in season 4 where I talk about how I feel about what the hell is going on in our country and everything. I had thought about reading a piece of James Thurber's work, because I came to appreciate Thurber thanks to Keith Olbermann. The problem is that Thurber is under copyright. But so before I commit to reading one of his short stories, which is one of my favorite short stories, I will do the right thing and ask the permission of Thurber House in Columbus to see if I can get permission to read that short story for an episode of the podcast. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to, again, doing more interviews, seeing who among my friends still wants to be interviewed. There are a few areas that I still want to memorialize within the body of this podcast, including but not limited to, this is just off the top of my head, my time in Boy Scouts, because I know a lot of the Scouts I was in the same troop as are Facebook friends of mine, and I'm giving you this opportunity. Hey, come on the podcast and we'll talk about our time in Scouts. I'd love to get some people from the old Coda on this podcast. I know Clint is pretty busy with his own podcasts. Do check, and it's one we did name check on this podcast already, the Wednesday Night Drinking Practice, so check that out. And of course, I welcome my high school buddies to come on if they so choose. But one aspect of high school that hasn't been touched on that I want to get touched on is the whole Ski Dogs BSO rivalry. Does the rivalry still exist? Because I saw a post from someone involved in this rivalry that would suggest, yeah, it does still exist. It's still a thing. Never mind that we're 20 years removed from that rivalry. And to clarify for anyone listening and thinking, what the hell is he talking about, Ski Dogs BSO? It's an intramural basketball thing. Alright. So, and I guarantee you there's going to be at least 1 or 2 playthroughs. Like I said, I want to get That's a Wrap played through on the podcast, and there may be a possibility that we'll get a game of chess played through on the podcast. But we shall see. Anyway, I want to thank you all so much for listening. I want to thank you all so much for 3 great seasons over 2 great years, and for sticking with us through this global nightmare of a pandemic. Hopefully things will start to turn around soon for the better. And we'll see you in season 4 of this podcast is Uncalled For.
This podcast is Uncalled For is hosted, produced, and edited by Mike Chernevsky. Opening music is Fantasia by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. The outro music for this episode is Starting Over, courtesy of freestockmusic.com. Please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast through your favorite podcasting platform. Like our Facebook page at facebook.com/uncalledforpodcast, and check out our blog with show notes at uncalledfor.home.blog.
Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time.